Welcome, I'm Mike Chastain, Children's Director here at Victory Church, and I'd love to invite you to like and subscribe below so that you never miss any content that we post here on the YouTube channel. And without further ado, the message you actually came here to see.
Well, so the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, I don't want to belabor this point, but we know that it's very important to understand that he rose from the dead because it's what makes Christianity different from everything else in the sense that there's a lot of good teaching out there. You can look at, we used to make fun of Confucius. We used to call him Confuse Us when I was in high school. But you read some of his stuff, it kind of makes sense. You know, there's some good thoughts about life, how to live, some wisdom, and a lot of variety of things. But what makes Jesus and what raises Jesus above everything else is the fact that he rose from the dead, and he didn't come to just teach us how to live a decent worldly life, but it's about the forgiveness of sins. It's about the fact that no matter how well you live, you can't take away the fact that you fail and we're mortal and we all die, and that Jesus, when rising from the dead, is telling us that there is a path to perfection, and it's not on your works, but it's on his works. That when he died on the cross, he died for you on the cross. And that when he rose from the dead, he rose for you from the dead. And the proof to all of that is the fact that he did what? Rose from the dead. That's a pretty big key to all of this, is that he rose from the dead. In fact, the early church and the apostles, the disciples of the Apostle Paul, when they went to different places, they taught and they led with that fact. They led with Jesus. We're going to tell you about a guy who rose from the dead. And we're willing to be killed for it, tortured for it. We are willing to do this because we know that this is the truth, because the truth that he rose from the dead gets your attention, and then it opens up the path to say, now we can tell you about the forgiveness of sins. And now we can tell you about what a life with God really looks like in terms of following him, living like him, not to win salvation, not to win eternity, but because you already have it. And so this is very important. Now, Jesus, actually it was God in the Old Testament, establishes a rule that we use in Western culture when it comes to trials, and when it comes to trials not in the sense of afflictions, but trials in terms of the courtroom. The importance of witnesses. You know, I was listening to, and we had an incident I witnessed this week where everybody's talking about physical evidence. You need to have physical evidence. Like, if you can just get rid of the physical evidence, you'll be okay. But the power, though, of witnesses. All throughout history, if the power of witnesses is usually the most damning evidence. If you have somebody, but not just one, but if you have like two people say that I saw something, that's a huge weight in a court of law. And it's established in the Old Testament where God actually says you need two witnesses. Not just one, because then it's he said, she said kind of a thing. But no, you need two witnesses to an event. That's part of the process. Due process. It all starts from the Old Testament in that you assume someone is innocent until proven what? Guilty. And they actually worked really hard to protect people from vengeance. They actually set up sanctuary cities in the Old Testament. It says so that you could run to the sanctuary city, but you run there so you can wait for your trial. You're not just there forever, but you're waiting for your trial so somebody, the family that maybe you harmed, can't come get you and have revenge on you. So the Bible, and we're going to talk about this next week, how we trust it and we follow it, and how it's dependable. The Bible is filled with all sorts of things today that we laud and is great, but that other people poo-poo and push it aside because they don't realize that most of our culture is right here in the Bible, in the common sense that's in there. But let's get back to the witnesses then, though, for the resurrection of Jesus. That this is very important. To see actually not just him rising from the dead, but the idea of actually seeing Jesus walking around. Actually seeing him. And so, who are the witnesses that Jesus was and continues to be alive and well? Well, in the Bible we have his appearances to the disciples. We read about one this right now, just a few minutes ago. We read about one of the many, many different times he appeared to his disciples. And there are some people that when we look at that, would say maybe it's a hallucination. If you're sitting in a closed room, locked room, doors locked, windows shut, maybe it's stuffy in there, they used oil lamps, maybe they were getting a little high in the room just by the nature of things, and they were depressed and they were sad and they weren't eating right necessarily. Maybe it was a hallucination. The Oxford Dictionary describes hallucination as an apparent perception of external object not actually present. So this thing is just not there. You're seeing it, but it's not there. And hallucinations, though, psychologists would tell you that normally occur in highly strung, highly imaginative, and very nervous people, or in people who are sick or on drugs. The disciples, if you just looked at their nature, don't really fit these categories, especially all of them. You have burly fishermen, a tax collector. Tax collectors are not known for hallucinations, all right? Skeptics, like Thomas, who was one of the very first ones, says, I'm not going to believe it until I actually see it. They're unlikely to hallucinate. And people who hallucinate would be unlikely to suddenly stop having the same hallucinations. If it's an ongoing thing, it doesn't just stop. And in the course of history, we know we have Ascension Day, which happens like 40 days after Easter, where Jesus was not here anymore. And the hallucinations stopped, and they don't really talk about him appearing like this. Again, appearance in different ways, but not like this. And so the hallucinations stopped. And then Jesus appeared to his disciples on 11 different occasions over a period of 6 weeks. And the number of occasions and the sudden cessation make this hallucination theory highly improbable. Furthermore, Paul records that over 500 people saw the risen Jesus. Now, it is possible for one person to hallucinate, but 500 people to share the same yeah, thank you. All right. To share that same hallucination. How possible is that? Very unlikely. And I was reading through this, and somebody said, well, the 500, and it really happened. It sounds like it's maybe an inflated number because the story of Jesus, like a lot of stories in history, they become legendary, and so the numbers grow. Would it have really happened? And Paul writes this, and it's a guy trying to prove something, and he's making a statement. You don't lie and inflate a number knowing that people are going to question it. And he can say there's been 500 people. If you want them, here are their names. You can go interview them. You can go talk to them yourself. Because he says many of them are still alive today. So you had 500 people sharing the same hallucination, probably not. And the next thing is hallucinations usually are subjective. There's no objective reality. It's like what the disciples said with that first thought is a ghost. Who is he? He's a ghost. But Jesus could be touched. He ate pieces of broiled fish. One occasion he cooked breakfast for the disciples. And Peter says in Acts chapter 1, it says they ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead in Acts chapter 10. And then in Acts 1, he says he held long conversations with them, teaching them many things about the kingdom of God. You know, a friend of mine recently told me, I'm just going to share, this is him. But he did the research on it, and he looked it up, and he says, in antiquity, they had four tests to see if somebody was a ghost or not. And because, like you, the people think about ghosts. They think, what am I seeing? What am I looking at? And they came up with a test of 4 things. They said, first thing you do is you look at their feet. Are they planted on the ground, or are they floating? Well, what did Jesus do? Here's my hands, here's my feet. And so he gets, okay, sign 1, not a ghost. And I love how Jesus even plays along with this, if this is true. He said, plays along with it. And then the second thing is, you look at, you grab their hands and you feel, are there flesh and bones? And what does Jesus say to his disciples in our reading today? Touch my hands. Come on, guys. Ghosts don't have flesh and they don't have bones inside. And then it says, also then look, does it eat? Does a ghost eat? And what did he do? Okay, you got anything to eat around here? I don't know if he was hungry or not, or if he was trying to prove a point. Look, guys, I'm eating fish. I'm not a ghost. And then the last thing, and I don't know how he satisfied this one, but it says, look for teeth. Look for teeth. Like, apparently ghosts don't have teeth. They say, look for teeth, and so maybe he just smiled, okay, and just touched his teeth. I don't know. But when he was with them, he says, like, peace be with you. If you're uncomfortable, look, my hands, my feet, I've got it all. I'm not a ghost. I'm not a ghost. And he satisfied these things. So we have the appearances to the disciples, and like we shared last week, all these guys would die for this truth. They saw him. A hallucination, I don't know how many people would die for a hallucination. Because after all, did I just see that? Now, the first one you may be saying, did I just see it? But when you have multiple times of seeing something, you realize that something is true. So we have the witnesses of his appearance to the disciples. But we also have, in witnessing what's happening, you have the immediate effect. The effect of Jesus rising from the dead, as one would expect, had a dramatic impact on the world. The church was born and grew at a tremendous rate. As writer of many popular and scholarly works, Michael Green puts it, he says, the church, beginning from a handful of uneducated fishermen and tax gatherers, swept across the whole known world in the next 300 years, is a perfectly amazing story of a peaceful revolution that has no parallel in the history of the world. It came about because Christians were able to say to inquirers that Jesus did not only die for you, he is alive. You can meet him and discover for yourself the reality we are talking about. They did, and they joined the church, and the church, born from that Easter grave, spread everywhere. All because of the risen Savior. And being able to see him, and as Jesus would walk through his disciples, and he picked up the Bible, and he said, here's all the proofs. I fulfilled this, and then and the people were able to say, here's where it is. It points to him. This is why we knew it had to happen. And Jesus pointed out into the history of the scriptures, and they knew it, and they were able to share it. Here's how all of this points to Jesus. And if you don't believe in the Bible, well, we've got a guy who rose from the dead. He's rose from the dead, and you're going to pay attention to anybody can come to the conclusion that we need to pay attention to this. But now here's the third one, that I think we undervalue to a degree because we don't really think about it. We worry about the message from antiquity of how do we know that that actually all happened. But this is one we cannot undervalue, and it also includes you. The common Christian experience. That countless millions of people down through the ages have experienced the risen Jesus Christ. They consist of people of every color, race, tribe, continent, nationality. All throughout history. You know, I've shared this before, but that was when I did our trip to the Holy Land, when we did that, and we did it the week of Easter. And so there are a lot of people from all over the world. Different dresses, different how they dress, different skin colors, different accents, different languages, and everybody gathering around this one thing. And they're celebrating the risen Jesus Christ from all over the world. And they came from different economic, social, intellectual backgrounds, but they all have, and we all have, the common experience of the risen Jesus Christ. We can pray to him. We get answers. God opens his word. We see him. Sometimes it's circumstantial evidence of somebody the other day popped into somebody's head. I'm going to pray for you. I don't know why. Text that to a message to the person, and they're like, that's exactly the right time because we're going through this right now in an immediacy. That God is working in a variety of different ways. That we only have one answer, and that it's the risen Jesus Christ, who wasn't just alive back then, but if he rose from the dead, that means he continues to be alive today. And he's working in the common Christian experience. There's a prayer book a daily prayer book that is part of kind of like my devotion rotation written by John Bailey, A Diary of Private Prayer. And then on one of the days, he writes this. He says, he's praying to God. He says, you, God, you who were and are and will be, I thank you that this Christian way in which I walk is no untried or uncharted road, but a road beaten hard by the footsteps of saints, apostles, prophets, and martyrs. I thank you for the signposts and the danger signals with which it is marked at every turning, which may be known to me through the study of the Bible and all of history and of all the great literature of the world. I love that prayer because usually it happens to me in a day when I come across that I'm like, my life is unique. Nobody else has experienced these problems. I don't know how am I going to do this, and God, where are you? And then it's a reminder that no, people have been living this again and again and again and again, and how we learn from each other and how we live together and how we have this common experience of God with Jesus Christ. And the evidence that Jesus rose from the dead is very extensive. Former Chief Justice of England named Lord Darling said, in its favor as living truth, there exists such overwhelming evidence, positive and negative, factual and circumstantial, that no intelligent, keyword, intelligent jury in the world would fail to bring in a verdict that the resurrection story is true. And if it's true, then we have to draw the conclusion, like one of the Roman soldiers did during the crucifixion. As he nailed Jesus to the cross, he witnessed his death. He felt the earthquake. He saw the cloud, saw darkness fall on the earth. And he cried out, he said, this man is the Son of God. Something in that moment, a guy who was not culturally or historically a Jew, just all of a sudden in that moment, this is the Son of God. And if he's God, then he's supreme. He's over all things. So what do we do with that? What do we do with that? C.S. Lewis sums it up like this. He says, we are faced with then with a frightening alternative. He says, either Jesus was and is what he said, or else he's something insane or something worse. But to C.S. Lewis, it seemed clear that he could neither been insane or evil because of what he taught. You can look at what he taught, and you're like, this guy is not evil. He is not insane. However, he did rise from the dead. It says, so if he's not this, then however strange or terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that he was and is God. Terrifying in the sense that if I reject him, if I reject the Son of God, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for me? And you also have to think through it. I think this is one of sometimes our issues as Christians, is that we believe that he's the Son of God. We claim him to be the Son of God. We claim that he is supreme when it's convenient for us. Do you understand what I'm saying? When it's convenient. Because we'll act like turds all over here. But when it comes to our defense or to justify ourselves and our behavior, then he's the Son of God. What does that mean about the behavior over here? Am I following him, or am I using him? What does that mean? But also the fact that he would die for me, that as Jesus, if God, who is supreme, but would also die for me, what does that mean? He's supreme, yet he still died for me. He rose from the dead, but he chose to die for me. You die for someone if you love them. So what does that mean for me? Sometimes we have an attitude with God where he's against us and not for us. Does he love you? Or you wonder if God can love you. Or if you wonder, could he really die for my sins? He's God supreme. You die for that which you love. He loves you. And then a person who loves you also wants to be known by you. What does that mean? How do we get to know God? If he's risen from the dead, and we've got the evidence, we've got physical evidence, we've got eyewitness accounts, he wants to be known by us, and how do we get to know God? And because of that, we would always point to this. Oops. We're going to point to this, but next week, we're going to dive into one more doubt. How can I trust it? How can I trust the Bible? Because we've been hurt enough, we've been disappointed by things in our lives. I look at my sons. I trust my sons for the most part, because they've done enough just to throw that seed of doubt in there. And there are days where I want to believe them. And I want to believe them. But then there's always that, because we've been hurt. Hurt by people, hurt by people who taught us things. We've heard things. So how can we trust this? And then how can we read it? That's another doubt. I can't read this. It doesn't make sense to me. Well, how can we read it? So that's what we're going to talk about next week.